Welcome everyone to the first Blue Notes webinar of 2017. My name is Jeff Anderson. I will be here to moderate and to help our presenter along with the questions. We are very lucky. Our presenter this session is Carissa Shafto from the Galen College of Nursing. I'm very excited about this one myself. I saw a presentation that was very similar to it. She actually came and presented to the eXplorance team, and from that we were very encouraged, and we tried to push this to be part of the Blue Notes community. So I'm glad to be able to share this with you. So Carissa, are you online?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. I'm going to hand this over to you directly, and I will be here to moderate questions as they come in.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for having me and for doing this. I did have a lot of fun coming up to talk to the team a couple months back. And so I'm going to talk today about institutional effectiveness in institutional research. And I'm going to talk about, part of what I'm going to talk about is how eXplorance can help with all of that. And so I'll give an overview of, what I'm going to be talking about is what kind of data is used for institutional research and institutional effectiveness, how IR and IE fit in with a bigger picture of accreditation, which is something that I think has been increasing, at least in the US over the last 5 to 10 years, and how eXplorance can help with some of those new pressures. So I'll just give a quick outline, which is that I'm going to talk about my job, which even though my title is Director of Institutional Effectiveness, I actually am in charge of all of the IE and the IR functions and assessment for our college. And that's in part because we are a single-purpose nursing college. And so I think we do have 4 campuses, so we have something of a complex infrastructure, but we don't have all the different kinds of majors that a lot of other institutions do. I'm going to give a quick overview of accreditation. I'm guessing that most of the audience is pretty familiar with accreditation requirements, but I'll just do a quick overview. Talk about different kinds of data that we're using to address our IR and IE processes, and also some of that is specific to accreditation pressures. Why we chose eXplorance, and how we maintain quality of our data, and then what we do to ensure that there is access to and availability of data for folks who are, particularly folks who are in decision-making roles. Okay, so my responsibilities, as I said, are really threefold, and I do know that at other small institutions, you're often a one-man or one-woman show. Although I actually have a staff, there are actually 4 of us. I have 3 full-time staff. So the IE part is, are we effective as an institution at accomplishing our mission? And so in my role, that means, are we doing our job at training competent caring nurses? So we want to make sure that every graduate who comes out of our program is someone that I would feel comfortable, or that I would take my children to see, that anybody that I know, I'd be comfortable having them be my nurse. The IR piece is, are we making data-driven decisions? So are we using our own data to decide when we need to make changes in the way that we're operating? And then there's the program assessment piece, which is focused at the program level. So are our students meeting the outcomes that we've outlined for them? And I'll talk about that a little more, because that's something that I think has become more and more of a pressure from different accrediting agencies. But for all of these things, there are 4 different steps. There's data collection, analysis, interpreting, and explanation. And those are all things that fall under my team. And ultimately, if those things go well, then what we end up with are data-driven decisions, which is ultimately what we want. So a quick overview of regional accreditation. And I have in the US here, I don't know how many of our audience are international, but certainly eXplorance is headquartered in another country, and this works a little bit differently. But there are 6 regional accrediting bodies. And the gist is that you have to be regionally accredited in order for your students to be able to transfer their credits to other schools, and also to have degrees that are recognized by other colleges or universities. And so, we do not yet offer graduate degrees. So in order for our graduates to be able to take our bachelor's degree and go into a graduate program at another school, we need to have our regional accreditation in place for them to accept that degree. Regional accreditors are generally want colleges and universities to sort of prove a couple different kinds of things. One, that students are learning. I say, in all fairness, that this is something that they've really only recently asked colleges and universities to do. So we have program student learning outcomes that we have to define, and we need to measure, and we need to show our accreditors how we're actually evaluating students' achievements. For example, critical thinking, or whatever you want your learning outcome to be. We have to show, for example, that a certain percentage of students graduate and in what time frame. So it's pretty typical that four-year schools will report their six-year graduation rate. So that 150% time frame is a pretty standard metric that the department. And in some cases, they might want a specific percentage of students to be able to graduate in that time frame. They also want to know that students are getting what's advertised. So, you know, if you say that here are what your policies are, you do in fact need to follow those policies. There are also programmatic accreditors. And so the programmatic accreditors are looking at some of the same kinds of things, but they're usually discipline specific. And so in our case, because we're a nursing college, we have nursing accreditors that we work with. And it's a little bit looser than it is with regional accreditation. In some cases, for more prestigious programs, you do need to come from a program that has programmatic accreditation in order for them to recognize your degrees. It's generally not quite as strict as regional accreditation, but it also is important for getting student training opportunities. So for example, in order for us to get good clinical sites for our students to train, we need to have programmatic accreditation because that demonstrates that we have a high quality program. And like regional accreditors, there's generally a set of things that they want you to be able to demonstrate that, you know, that your students are learning, and specifically because they're discipline specific, they want to know that they're learning things specific to that discipline. And so for nursing, there are national guidelines for safety, for example, and for caring and compassionate behaviors. And they want us to be able to demonstrate how students are achieving those things. They might have you show that a specific percentage of students graduate and in a specific time frame, and they might define how you calculate that. That your graduates can become professionals. So most programmatic accreditors are discipline specific and in disciplines where you have to take some sort of exam to become a member of that profession. So in our case, it's becoming a licensed nurse. You have to pass the NCLEX, but you know, to become a lawyer, you have to pass the bar. So there's some sort of exam you have to enter that field. They want to know that your graduates get a job so that they can repay their student loans. That is a sort of federal pressure as well when it comes to the Department of Education. They want to make sure you don't have a bunch of graduates defaulting on their loans. And they want to know that your employers are satisfied with the graduate's preparation. And so for ACN, which is one of our nursing accreditors, they want to know that employers feel like our graduates were hired and ready to practice as an entry-level nurse when they arrived at the workforce, in the workforce. Okay, so just to pause, I feel like I talked pretty quickly. Talked about IE and IR in assessment and reviewed those pieces, which are probably pretty familiar to our audience, and some basics about accreditation and the kinds of things that they're asking colleges and universities to show. So now I'm going to move on to talk about some outcome measures. We have a specific set of outcome measures that we're actually using eXplorance Blue for. So when it comes to our student learning outcomes, we are asking from the student's perspective. So we're using Blue in a survey format as part of our course evaluations and some of our student satisfaction surveys, where we're asking students questions like, as a result of completing this program, do you agree, or do you rate on a scale whether you have improved in your ability to demonstrate caring behaviors, which is one of our student learning outcomes. And so we're asking for that indirect measure from the student's perspective, whether they feel like they have achieved that. We also use eXplorance Blue to gather data from our graduate employers. And so we typically do this in an interview format, and we use Survey Tool to collect that data. We evaluate our faculty development needs using Blue. So we generally ask faculty to rate their orientation process, their mentoring process, what sorts of tools they do not have that need to be added to our faculty development department. We use Blue to evaluate one small proportion of faculty performance. I know people have a lot of debates about the role of course evaluation in terms of evaluating faculty, but again, that's one piece of how the faculty is performing, at least, is whether students feel like they're approachable, are they available, do they act professional, sort of that set of things that, and I will say that we have revised our course evaluations a lot over the last few years, really trying to refine them into something that where we're asking questions that students really are in a good position to answer. So we're not asking them questions that are outside the scope of their role as a student. And these are all subjective measures. So, a lot of what we're using Blue for, at least, is collecting that indirect data. We also measure our outcomes in a lot of direct ways. So we look at student performance on specific assignments. We generally collect that data through our learning management system. We use Canvas. In some cases, we're looking at exams as well. That's important in our case because as a nursing school, we do have a lot of standardized exams, and we have students have to practice doing those in order to prepare themselves for the licensing exam. We look at things like our actual graduation rates and our placement rates in terms of how many graduates are getting a job, and within, typically in our case, we're looking within a 12-month window after they graduate. We look at performance on licensure exams. These are reported by a national licensing board. And those are objective measures. So, I think, again, depending on how familiar everyone is with assessment, it's generally recommended that you collect at least 2 different kinds of measures, ideally a third, where you can really triangulate your data for assessment purposes so that you're getting multiple perspectives or multiple kinds of measures to determine how well your students are doing on something. So in terms of Blue, we chose Blue for a couple really specific reasons. And I should have said this at the beginning, but we've been using eXplorance for almost 2 years now. And we primarily use it, as I stated, for we do a lot of surveys in-house with students and staff and faculty. And we chose it because primarily we needed to be able to combine theory, clinical, and lab components for our course evaluations. This is really important in nursing, but also in lots of other health fields. I know medical schools have similar issues where you might have multiple instructors all teaching together the same course or different components of the course, and you don't want to give a student an individual evaluation for every single instructor that they're working with. In some cases they could have 10 that they'd have to fill out just for one course. Blue has a great setup for being able to manage that. We also wanted to be able to link our student schedules for automatic updating so that, like many other schools, we sometimes have TVA teaching a course until further in the term than we'd like. And so as those updates are made, we want the software to automatically update to account for those schedule changes. We also wanted our surveys and evaluations to be accessible in multiple formats. So we want our students to be able to do it on their laptop. We want them to be able to do it on their smartphones. They could do it in class, in between classes, whatever's convenient. And that it integrate, and part of that was integrating with our LMS, which is Canvas, and we have a great integration with Canvas. We also wanted access to what I'm calling raw data, although the reporting features of Blue have turned out to be mostly good enough that we don't really need that. In terms of our implementation process, we used it for a small cohort initially. We rolled it out college-wide immediately after. We use cascades to target different groups for different data or some different kinds of questions. So I know that's a feature that's particularly helpful for some of these items for accreditation, where we're looking to ask students only students, for example, in online courses, where they're being offered in an online format. And so we can ask them about things about that course that are specific to that modality. And our needs continue to evolve. And so the software seems to be evolving with us for now in terms of what our needs are, where we're really, we both have, more business intelligence type reporting, and then we have other kinds of reporting. Okay, so another pause here just to say what's left. And so these, I think, were really the the bullets for the advertisement for the talk. And so this is probably where most of the questions are going to be. But I'm going to talk now about how we maintain our quality of data and also how we ensure that people have access to data, that data is available. So one way that we manage our data quality is through our faculty involvement. So faculty play a very important role for us in terms of what kind of data we collect, how we go about collecting that. So for example, for all of the evaluations and surveys that we do, we typically will form an ad hoc committee that includes faculty members and usually administrators as well, and then I'm typically someone from my team, to decide how the different questions are being used, how can we change it, how can we ensure that we're only asking people to give us their time on questions that we then can have actionable follow-up. So, you know, for example, we used to always ask our students about parking. We don't have access to any more parking, so we don't ask them about that in terms of availability because that's not something we can actually act on. We can't create more parking spots for them even if they're dissatisfied. So we really try to limit it to what are the things we can act on and what are the things that are going to drive positive change for our institution. And faculty play a big role in that because faculty are in the front lines in terms of working with students. And so they know both, they know largely what they're using in terms of course evaluation. So what are the kinds of questions that students are answering that are useful to them when they continue to try to improve their course. And this is something that is differentially stressed, I think, by different accreditors. So at least in nursing, this is something that is very, very strongly stressed by our nursing accreditors, where they really want to know that faculty are involved in the whole process of program evaluation, where they're deciding how to go about collecting the data, how you can make changes to actually improve their that they should be involved at every step of the way. There are other really important things when it comes to data quality. So one that I think has probably been the most important in my role, at least in my institution, is that I am in a position as a sort of gatekeeper for our data systems. And so when I was initially hired, we had a lot of data integrity problems. Again, I think that's probably not unique to our institution. But we had, for example, a large number of admissions staff and other staff who had access to our admissions data, so things like entrance tests. And so what we found was that it was basically an impossible task to police errors in that system because there were so many people who were able to make those edits. So that was an early change that was made where we really tried to designate a very small number of individuals at each campus who could be the people who were making those edits so that we could give other people access to read the data, but not necessarily to edit it or to delete. And so that has been a huge, huge part of us maintaining data integrity in our system, is that when there are new staff that come in, for example, in admissions, although that's not the only case, any request to add new users always comes through me as well, so that we can make sure that we know who is in there being able to edit the system. That works in part because we partner very strongly with IT and our online team. And I know that this is something that varies quite a bit across institutions, where there oftentimes, I think, are a lot of tensions with IT, where the IE or IR teams don't necessarily get along or work as closely with IT. In our case, having a very strong, positive relationship with IT has really enabled us to do a lot of the things that we've been able to do. We also have a great relationship with our online team, so folks who manage our LMS, who are not in IT, who are a separate team. But they help us figure out how can we get faculty to systematically use their gradebook, for example, so that we can write scripts to pull data out of specific courses where, for example, we want to identify who are all the students who are failing their first exam in a given course or a set of courses. And so those relationships are a really, really big part of maintaining data quality because we continue to work as a team to make sure that not too many people have access and that we have space for our data, and related to that we can regularly audit. And so some of the auditing that we have to do requires IT or online assistance because of the way the systems are set up. And so that's something that we're able to do because we have those relationships. But these three pieces have been very critical to us in terms of data quality, where when I was hired, about 3.5 years ago, data quality was a big problem for us. We had a lot of analyses that we wanted to be able to do, and that we ultimately didn't feel like we could because we weren't comfortable with the quality of the data. And now we're just in a very, very different point in maturity in using data because we know that the data is good. Okay, so the last piece is having access to and providing data, so making sure the data is available. We've done this in a couple ways that have been particularly successful. One is that we have an electronic ticketing system. We use an open source system. It's called OS Tickets. And actually, after we started using it, we've rolled that out to a lot of other operational departments at the college also use the same ticketing system. So the thing about the system that has worked really well is that if people ask, for example, for the same data, we know what they asked for the last time because we have a ticket number. We can do a search in the system to see what did they ask for, what was the format, make sure that we can provide it in the same way. This also makes it easier for us to identify when different people are asking for the same kinds of information so that we can try to maximize our time for responding to a specific data request. Multiple people might have really asked for the same thing, but they didn't know the other people were asking for it. Maybe they came from different campuses or are in different departments. And they might even ask for it in a different way, but if we get that all in a central spot, it's easier for us to identify when it's really the same thing. And having that system has allowed us to keep better track of who we're serving. So we can do things like we can run reports to figure out how many campuses are submitting tickets, how many individuals are, so we can look across our different leaders and make sure that they're utilizing my team in terms of getting data requests and doing analyses when it comes to evaluating our programs. So that system has really been instrumental. Another thing that we've done is early on, after we dealt with some of our data integrity problems, we built an intranet. So we use WordPress, which is also an open source framework, although there are some that are probably better at this point than what WordPress is for this purpose. And so what we use it for is we use it as an intranet. It's just a website. Faculty and staff can all access it from anywhere that they are as long as they use their standard login. So it does work with single sign-on so that they don't have to remember a separate password. We have an interactive dashboard that's part of it where we can link up to our student information system. And so faculty or staff can go in and pull things like how many students are enrolling and what's our admissions pipeline look like for the next term. How does that compare to where we were at this point last time? So when we were 45 days out from the start, how many students did we have enrolled and how many leads did we have in the pipeline compared to 45 days out now? So there's a lot of tools in there for taking data that is in our student information system, but that system in and of itself is not very accessible to a lot of our staff. It's not as user-friendly. And so we've built this dashboard to just try to make it a little bit easier for people to access information. And then we also have a whole static section of our site where we post all of our standard metrics. So we post our licensing pass rates, we post our completion rates, job placement rates, et cetera. We clearly have what all of the calculations are that are used, how all of those things are formulated, how things line up with our different accrediting agencies so that people can see how we're meeting those accreditation requirements. And that really has been also a big game changer. I think both of these things have been big in terms of just getting data in front of people. So nobody has to come to me or send an email to someone to find out how our graduates are doing or how our students are doing. They can just go on our site and they can look. They just have to be able to log in. And then a third thing that's been helpful, but more recently, is since we've had Blue, just being able to do more standardized reporting and being able to break things down with filtering and other tools to really provide data, again, in the format that our users need it. And so, I always am reminding when I do faculty trainings or trainings with staff that my department is really a service department. So we're there to manage the integrity of the data, make sure that it's available to everyone and that they can access it. And a big part of that is understanding what our users need and in what format do they need to be able to read things. So my data savvy team, the way that we need to look at data is not necessarily that our users need to look at it. And that's particularly true when it comes to faculty, where we really have to make sure that we're getting the faculty perspective and that we're setting things up in a way that's going to be useful to them. So our system, I've alluded to this with a lot of other pieces I've talked about before, but we collect our data in a number of ways. One is through our learning management system. We use Canvas. I know a lot of institutions use Blackboard. There are other ones that I've used in other institutions. That's really a great source for a lot of student level, course level data. And that's something that we're just now, it's just now standardized enough in terms of our institution's use of it that we're really starting to be able to build things like early alert systems about our students, where we can really start to look at things like score ranges on exams or at certain points in the term or on certain assignments to try to really start identifying students who are at risk in specific courses well before they get to the midterm. We also use the learning management system to store artifacts. So we use specific course artifacts to evaluate our student learning outcomes, and those are generally stored in the learning management system. And because we have a standardized naming convention for the gradebook, that enables us to go through and try to pull out specific artifacts at random so that we can try to evaluate a random set of students across all terms, across all campuses. We also have a student information system, as other colleges and universities all do. There we're storing a lot of that admissions information and things related to financial aid, excuse me, scheduling information, so we can tie, for example, student schedules. We can look at the student's performance on the whole, whereas the learning management system is really only to that course. So, and then we have our human resources system, and there we are largely storing information about employees. So we're looking at a lot of faculty data and staff data as well. And we also have, within my team, we've built some internal systems where, largely various database systems, where we're combining information from these different places into one spot that we can use, a lot of it for accreditation purposes. So we actually, just this past term, rolled out a credentialing center, which is essentially a really fancy database, but we have it linked up through Canvas, through our learning management system directly. So faculty think that they're accessing Canvas, they're using the same logon, but they're ultimately going into this database that we set up, where we can store all of the credentialing information, all of the things that they would typically put on their CV in a system that we're then able to query. And so that's really important for a lot of our programmatic accreditation purposes, because we have to be able, for example, to run reports on whether our faculty are maintaining their continuing education credits, which is required as part of their license, whether they're participating in scholarship activities. So we're not a research university, but part of our accreditation requires that faculty are engaging in ongoing scholarship, and that is part of their job description as well. So that homegrown system that combines information from these different existing systems really allows us to take our data collection and reporting to a whole other level, at the same time as being very user-friendly on the faculty end. And as I've said, we share all of our data. So this was something that was really important for me when I joined Galen, was making sure that we didn't have things locked away. I mean, I know it seemed like early on there were a lot of things that, there were different kinds of information that you might ask for, and it seemed like you had to have a special handshake or something in order to get it. And so I really wanted to move past that and say that, in order to enable our faculty and our staff to maximize our student outcomes, they have to know how we're doing. They have to know how their campus is doing compared to the other campuses. And even just giving them the information without telling them what to do about it will put them in a better position to then try to determine for themselves. And so this is something we've done really recently with regard to retention, where we have started sharing course retention information with faculty so that a faculty member can see what their retention looks like, how many students are failing but also dropping their course compared to everyone else who teaches that course. And we're providing it to them in a format where they don't know the names of the other faculty members, but it's just to give them an awareness of how their course performance varies compared to other other faculty members who are teaching the same course. And it's really to empower them to be able to reach out to those other faculty members to try to decide, you know, should they be making changes? Like, what's that other faculty member doing that 20% more of their students are passing their course than I am? So what's different about the way that we're delivering that content? Okay, so that's relatively short, but I know people probably prefer short over long, and I'm hoping that we might have some questions. So I will open it up now. I think it's just chatting questions, I think.
Yeah, actually a lot of people signed in after we explained all of that. If anyone does have any questions, you can just go to the little questions section in the GoToMeeting. Maybe I can start the ball rolling. I was very interested when you were talking about that you have questions for students, questions for graduate employers, questions for faculty. Do you manage that all out of one project with Multirater to get comparative data, or are you doing that in separate projects?
No, we're actually doing that in separate projects, in part because some of that data cannot be tied to specific students. We have to make sure that we're maintaining the students' anonymity in some of those cases, and so we can't actually connect them. So there is actually a new project we're getting ready to do where we would do just that, where we would have Multirater. It's something we haven't done before specifically, but it's something that we're rolling out this quarter. But for those what we're really trying to show is not that an individual student, for example, was prepared to practice as an entry-level nurse for that employer, but we want that employer to really talk about our graduates more generally, even though they might be thinking of a specific graduate or a specific student when they're giving us their feedback.
That makes sense. You mentioned that you've been refining your instrument over time. You're adding questions, you're taking things away. Are there specific kinds of questions you used to have that you've decided don't make sense for course evaluations, or vice versa? Are there things you brought in that really have made an effect?
Yes, we are mostly taking questions away. I sometimes let people add questions, but in general, our surveys are much longer than I think they need to be. So for course evaluations, yes, specifically, we did have a couple questions. When I first started, we had questions that were, if I could remember the exact wording, we were basically asking students to rate whether their program director, for example, was professionally representative of the nursing discipline or something like that, which is just way outside the scope of what a student would really be able to answer. And what we were finding was that students were rating it anyway, even though they didn't have context. And then because we had the data, the deans felt like they had to try to use that as part of that employee's evaluation when it really wasn't appropriate.
Okay, that makes sense. It seems you were really thorough. There aren't a whole lot of questions. Maybe a good question at this point. You have your information up on the screen. If people do have additional questions, if there's follow-up, is it okay if they contact you directly?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly why I put it up there. I'm happy to talk in more detail. Like I said, I wasn't sure how many questions, but I wanted to make sure I didn't run over, so I figured I'd err on the side of being shorter.
Well, I'm sure everybody appreciates that. This is, like I say, for some people, this was during the lunch hour, so I'm sure that there's a lot of back and forth. Well, then, thank you very much for your time. And if anyone does have any questions, they can send them in to us at eXplorance or directly to Carissa. And we really appreciate this.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good day.
You too.